Welcome.
I'm Cameron Scott, one of the story architects of Star Wars: The High Republic.
This is Dominic Pace, who plays Gekko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian.
Hi, I'm Claudia Gray. I write Star Wars books.
And you're listening.
And you are listening
to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 119. So my friends, this week I am tackling another batch of Darth Vader comics from the 2020 run of Vader Comics, which is the third run. These follow on from the Vader comics that were intertwined with the Crimson Reign episodes. So the last episode of Crimson Reign that I tackled was episode 110, which was Crimson Reign number 5, and that inside it had Darth Vader number 23. So this is a sort of 6 issues in between Crimson Reign and before Hidden Empire starts, which is the final of the crossovers between Aphra, Vader, Bounty Hunters, and the main run of Star Wars. If you want to hear the other in-between issues from the respective other comics, I tackle Bounty Hunters in episode 114, the main Star Wars run in 115, and the Dr. Aphra run in 117. So then, the next sort of big collections I'll be doing will be the Hidden Empire, but I'll delve into all of that sort of stuff right at the end. Now these comics are set after Empire Strikes Back, but before Return of the Jedi, and after the events of Crimson Reign, and it's all centering around Vader and the Handmaidens, which are PADMÉ'S Handmaidens, which I'll get far more into when we actually tackle some of these plot details of these comics, but obviously in prior episodes of these Darth Vader comics, it has been touched upon and the Handmaidens have appeared prior, so make sure you check out those other episodes. Details will be in the description, for you can check out the other Darth Vader 2020 episodes. So delving into some of the personnel and release information, the writer for all of these comics is Greg Pak, the artist for issue 24 is Marco Castiello, the artist for issues 25 to 28 is Raffaele Ienco, and the artist for issue 29 is Luke Ross. The colour artist for issues 24 to 28 is Carlos Lopez, and then for issue 29 it was Federico Blee. Issue 24 was released June 29th, 2022, issue 29 was released November 30th, 2022, and the trade paperback collection, there's actually 2 of them. So the first trade paperback collection is volume 5 of Darth Vader, that's issues 23 to 27, that was released January 10th, 2023, and then volume 6 of Darth Vader, which is issues 28 to 32, that is coming out June 27th, 2023. And friends, with that all in mind, let's delve into the first of 6 issues, which is issue number 24, so here is The Crawl. Sabé has revealed to Darth Vader that she knows his secret. Underneath his armour and machinery is the Jedi Knight once known as Anakin Skywalker. Playing to his sympathies for his homeworld, Sabé leads Vader to Anakin's old friends, Kitster and Wold, whose struggling community is the victim of a corrupt governor working with Crimson Dawn. Now, Sabé, with Vader's help, is getting ready to take a stand against the Governor and Crimson Dawn. So as put in there, Sabé is one of the handmaidens of Padme Amidala. She is actually who Keira Knightley played in The Phantom Menace as Padme's body double. And Padme has had plenty of handmaidens over the years. I will delve into them as this sort of plot unfolds, but one of them that you would know as well was in Attack of the Clones, and that was Dormé, played by Rose Byrne. So in the prequels, primarily in Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, the handmaidens were in it quite a bit, and they play quite a pivotal role in other elements of the prequel trilogy, and a lot of it's behind the scenes, and a lot of it is featured in the Queen's trilogy of books, which are by E.K. Johnston. Now those are The Queen's Peril, Queen's Shadow, and Queen's Hope. So with that all in mind, let's get straight into the plot details of issue 24. And to clarify, if this is your first time on the show, welcome, hello there, and thank you for tuning in. I go through the plot details of each of the comics in chronological order, and then along the way I give additional information on certain characters or trivia I find interesting, planets, species, those sort of things, so you widen your understanding of the canon while also understanding what's going on in the comic realm. But as I always say, please pick up these comics either physically or digitally, support the creators of this, and help this industry keep on going, because this works as a good placeholder if you can't pick up every single comic, or if you want a refresher or things like that, but I would still encourage people to please contribute and pick up the comics or read them where you can. So with that in mind, let's get straight into the plot. So Vader and Sabé plan to get the Crimson Dawn governor. The communications are blocked on the planet, and 33 of Wold/Kitster's men are on the Imperial ship, which is a Star Destroyer in orbit. The droid Zed is tracking the governor and notes that the governor isn't actually on the Star Destroyer with all of Wold and Kitster's people. They're actually 300 kilometers north in the old abandoned science colony. So it cuts to the science colony, and you can see people are up to something. It's not overly sure what, but then an alarm sounds. When this alarm sounds, it shows that Darth Vader, Sabé, and a few troops are all attacking. Now, Crimson Dawn have got a few things kind of guarding. They've got a couple of battle droids, some other B1 battle droids, which are the long-nosed ones from Phantom Menace, and then also some super battle droids, which are the ones that you see primarily in sort of the Clone Wars and in Revenge of the Sith. The most iconic scene I find with the super battle droids is when R2-D2 is grabbed in that first sort of part of the movie where he's grabbed by two grey battle droids on the ship, the Invisible Hand, and he sprays them with like fluid, some sort of oil, and then it activates his like jet propulsion things, his jet boosters, rocket boosters, and then flies off and they set on fire and kind of melt in essence. Those are what I remember the most about super battle droids, so that's a good example. So one of these battle droids charges up some sort of energy cannon thing, and it hits Vader and stuns him temporarily. Sabé and fellow stormtroopers then defend Vader while he's kind of coming to a little bit more, coming out of the stun, as more Crimson Dawn agents start to attack. Ochi of Bestoon arrives, shoots a couple of droids, but the governor does manage to get away on some transport. Vader is understandably annoyed at Ochi because Ochi just seems to make a mess of everything he touches, and then they check the data in this facility, and it shows that this Imperial machine seems to be draining the life force from the planet and from all living things. There's an engineer nearby who does apologise for it and says, "Look, I'm really sorry, I didn't realise that this was what we were doing, we weren't told with the information," and Sabé says, "Don't worry, it's not your fault." Now, this engineer or scientist in particular is someone called Aira, A-I-R-A. Now, they are an Iakaru, so A-I-K-A-R-U. Now, the name Iakaru comes from the Amazonian Uakari monkey. So these beings look like furry, kind of monkey ape people, but they're still anthropomorphic, they're still full-size humanoids, and the species seemingly involved in the jungle canopy of Iakaru, and so they have really, really good reflexes. Now, you will have seen one of these in Rogue One. They were on the Battle of Scarif, and from what memory serves, they were called Bistan, and they were, I think, on the gun. So when you see one of the ships, I think it's a V-wing, land and drop a lot of troops off, there's a person on the end of this like turret gun thing, and I believe that person is Bistan, and they are a member of the Iakaru species. Now, you first saw the Iakaru people in the Galaxy of Heroes game, because they are new creatures to canon, they're not in Legends. They are also obviously in Rogue One, as I have mentioned. They're also in the Aftermath Empire's End book, Poe Dameron in Freefall, and they're also in Screaming Citadel Part 1, the comic which was the crossover with Dr. Aphra and with the main run of Star Wars comics. But back to the story. After Sabé says to the scientists and things that it's not their faults, Vader then thinks to himself that he actually knew about what's kind of going on here, or so it seems. And then he thinks about when the Death Star blew up Alderaan, as well as him killing Tusken Raiders and younglings and all those sorts of things. And then he has like a warped recollection of his last conversation with Padmé. It seems to jumble between Padmé and Sabé and things, and Sabé thinks there's still good in him, and he's like figuratively putting walls up, but in his mind he's literally putting walls between him and Sabé. He then kind of snaps out of it back to sort of in the room with Ochi and Sabé and the scientists and whatnot, and without saying very much, he grabs Ochi's speeder and then goes off to seemingly fight Crimson Dawn or find this governor. Sabé notes that they should destroy the factory that they're in, but will await for Darth Vader's return, and then the last panel of this comic shows that Darth Vader's mind shows like an explosion as Sabé tries to push to get more into where he is. So that's some imagery for you. With that in mind, let's move on to issue number 2. And I will say from here, there's not that many connections to other content until like the penultimate issue, so the next 3 is going to be me just kind of giving vague plot details. So for issue 25, it starts off with the Crimson Dawn / Imperial governor, who is called Tauntaza, fleeing as Darth Vader pursues. They get onto this transport, and then Vader is holding it in place with the Force, but they push harder and harder. Some of the circuitry on board starts to spark and even fire, but the ship does manage to get away. Meanwhile, Sabé and co are checking for data around this place a little bit more to try and find the answer to the question of what is actually being used to drain this planet and the life force energy, like how is it even happening? Because the scientists don't actually explicitly know, they seem to each have like a little piece of the puzzle. Ochi wants to go after Darth Vader, but Sabé stops him, and he's like, well, who are you to tell me? And the stormtroopers then kind of load their guns and aim at Ochi, and then the droid Zed confirms that Darth Vader actually made Sabé a lieutenant, so she actually outranks all of them, including Ochi. So back to Vader, he is on a shuttle approaching the Star Destroyer that, in theory, should have the governor on it. As they approach, the Imperial officer who is flying the shuttle communicates to the Star Destroyer and says you need to give up Governor Tauntaza, because if you defend yourselves, you will die. Vader gets on board, people are trying to defend themselves, so Vader kills some Imperial officers and also destroys a few droids. He gets to the bridge, and then all of the crew members, including the captain, have got their hands up, ready to kind of surrender, and the captain says to just let the governor complete her mission, and then everything will become clearer. Vader then communicates to Admiral Piet, who is the gentleman we see in Return of the Jedi. In fact, you see him in Empire Strikes Back when Admiral Ozzel flies his Star Destroyer too close to Hoth, and then the rebels find out that the Empire have come. Then Vader chokes Ozzel via like comm, he dies, and then Piet takes over. And he's in charge of Vader's fleet, or at least second in command to Vader, in charge of his fleet, all the way up to his death in Return of the Jedi, when Vader's ship, the Executor, or the Executor, crashes into the side of the Death Star 2. So Vader tells Piet to destroy the Star Destroyer that he's currently on in 2 hours unless Darth Vader communicates to him and says otherwise. And then he asks the captain aboard, where is the governor once again? Back to planet side, you've got Kitster speaking to Sabé, warning that there's a storm approaching. Zed then notes that it seems to be caused by the governor and their machine. So Sabé wants to locate the cause and try and stop this. And then the scientist Aira wants to help as well. So the three of them, including Ochi and some stormtroopers, head there on speeder bikes. They get nearer this machine that seems to be causing all this stuff, and Kitster and Sabé seem to be like sucked into the air or blown off of their speeder bikes. It's kind of unclear what happens to them, but they are no longer on their speeder bikes. And then Ochi is like, okay, let's go back. Darth Vader's shuttle then lands in the eye of the storm. It gets a little bit damaged, so it does have to crash land, but it seems to be okay and Vader's fine. And Ochi says that they need to await extraction from the Executor. But there is a scientist who is there who says the storm is going to get here first and it's going to kill all of us. But I'm afraid we haven't got any ships left. There are no speeders left. Obviously the shuttle crash landed, so it doesn't seem to be able to fly, so they haven't really got many options. But there is one vehicle that is left, and there's Kitster's old Podracer. And that's where issue 25 ends. So issue 26, now this one in particular is probably the most important issue to read out of all of these. The imagery on this is quite powerful, and a lot of what you see is just images. There's not that much dialogue, and I seem to recall that this one was one that Greg Pak was very excited to get out. It is called Into the Sand, and it is a really, really cool issue. I would recommend picking it up. So starting with the plot, the governor manages to escape Vader's clutches once again and gets to this machine that is causing the sandstorm or the storm or whatever. Darth Vader then thinks back about not liking sand, so you see him mention it to Padme in Attack of the Clones, everyone's favourite piece of dialogue. And back at the camp, it is noted that the storm is going to hit there in about 4.5 minutes. So Vader gets on his racer, or rather Kitster's racer. It's 2 Podracer parts with a seat on the top, and then Wold, who is the Rodian from The Phantom Menace, who laughs and goes, hoo hoo hoo, oh Annie, and like, you're so silly, that sort of thing. It's the kid Rodian from Phantom Menace, you'd recognise him. And he says to Vader that he hasn't got a chance of riding that Podracer, only the great Podracers could drive that through the storm. Vader then thinks back to Wold's comments in The Phantom Menace saying something similar, and then it goes back to present day. He activates the Podracer and then goes into the storm, avoiding debris and trees and all kinds of stuff. He then thinks of himself telling Shmi, his mother, that he won't leave her, and then he thinks about leaving when he's with Qui-Gon Jinn and kind of sees his mother kind of disappear into the sand, and then there are 6 pages of flashbacks. Now, these flashbacks basically span Anakin's life from when he was younger, which is one of the reasons I said it's worth picking up in this comic, but you see him at the Jedi Temple and Yoda mentioning that he's afraid of losing his mother, and then he thinks about his mother being killed by the Tusken Raiders, him killing the Tusken Raiders, then Padme falling from the LAAT in Attack of the Clones onto the sand dune, and then Anakin and Obi-Wan sort of arguing about saving Padme, all that sort of stuff, and then it cuts to present day again, where Vader spots Kitster in the storm. Kitster notes that Sabé is stuck underneath a tanker next to him. So Vader uses the Force to pick up this tanker, and as the sandstorm continues to rage, Kitster and also Sabé seem to get sort of covered by the sand slowly. Vader then comms to Piet and says to fire on his location with the ventral turbo lasers of the Star Destroyer. Piet hesitates, but then Vader Force chokes him, and then Piet's like, okay, whatever, sorry, and then orders them to shoot on his position. He shows that Vader is hidden inside the tanker that was crushing Sabé, along with Chit-Chat and Sabé. After the shots have been fired, he then gets out and everything seems to be okay, and then he carries Sabé. And then the final panel of this comic shows that Palpatine is on his throne on Coruscant, it seems, and he notes to himself, "So you couldn't save your mother and you couldn't save Padme, but now you think you can." And then lots of laughter, like ha ha ha, Palpatine's evil laugh, and then that's where it ends. So obviously Palpatine knows that Vader's got some sort of connection to Sabé in some way, and he's probably going to manipulate it, because that's normally what Palpatine does. So with that in mind, we move on to issue 27. So issue 27 starts with Ochi and the remaining people at the village seeing the storm starting to subside. The comms now seem to be working, and then Darth Vader, Sabé and Chit-Chat all arrive. It's noted that the machine will reduce the planet to a desert in about 48 hours, so Darth Vader orders the Star Destroyer to fire upon this machine, and the turbo lasers shoot down, but it doesn't do any damage because this machine has a very strong shield. It's shown by the schematics that the shield seems to be powered by the drained energy from the planet itself, so the underside is unprotected while the energy is being drained. So the machine starts to approach, and Darth Vader just heads straight towards it with an astromech droid, who has the schematics to the machine. While this is happening, Sabé gets the villagers to evacuate. So Vader goes through the storm towards this machine, kills a couple of creatures along the way, and then gets straight to the machine. He seems to be weakening as the machine gets closer and closer. It does seem to be draining some of his life force, and while this is happening, his astromech is quietly getting closer and closer, getting underneath the machine. Now the governor and also the officers on board are starting to get a little bit cocky. They're thinking, oh, we've got Darth Vader, he's clearly starting to slow, he's clearly starting to weaken, so we've kind of got him now. Then Darth Vader's lightsaber activates, which seems to be in a compartment held by that little astromech droid. It then shoots up into the machine from the underside and then starts doing a huge amount of damage to it. There's fires that start, there's explosions that happen, and the governor and co on this machine are starting to flail and be like, what on earth is going on? Then Sabé and some stormtroopers go to attack, and the governor, Tauntaza, gets into an unstable power suit, kind of like an Iron Man suit, but more so like Ironmonger, I describe it as, so Jeff Bridges' character in the first Iron Man film. That sort of thing, quite a big, bulky power suit. So Darth Vader then appears on the bridge and goes to fight Tauntaza in her power suit. She blasts him with this energy beam thing, not dissimilar to what he was blasted with a couple of issues ago, and he catches it with his lightsaber. He holds it in place and pushes it back to her, and it destroys the weapon that was firing this. It was on part of the suit, but it seems to have just kind of popped off, and the suit seems to be relatively undamaged. The governor then says to Vader, with so much power, how long do you think that the Empire would just let it all go unanswered? And then, without much more dialogue, she then flies in the air and disappears. As she disappears, it's shown that she actually left a small trap for Vader, and an explosion goes off, which hits Vader pretty hard. He falls on the floor and his helmet is broken with only one eye sort of showing through. His eye lens is kind of broken. We've seen it in a few other pieces of Star Wars content, and Sabé then finds him on the floor. Sabé is then there questioning to herself whether or not she should kill Darth Vader right then and there, or whether she should save him. She's staring and thinking about it for a while, and then decides she will save him one last time. She will trust Padmé's judgment, thinking that there is still good inside of him. So the droid Z then gets the data from the astromech droid, and it shows that the governor's orders came from the Emperor himself. And then the final panels of this comic show that Sabé is carrying Darth Vader out, kind of an arm around her shoulder, and she says she now knows why she saved him. So that's the end of issue 27, so we move on to the penultimate issue, issue 28. So 28 starts with Darth Vader in a Bacta tank. He thinks of Sabé's words and then smashes out of the Bacta tank in a very dramatic fashion, which is standard for Vader/Anakin Skywalker. Then he is in his suit and he's on a Star Destroyer. Sabé is still there. He somewhat questions her why she's still there, and she says she's there to serve. He then asks about Governor Tauntaza, and she says, yeah, her orders came from Palpatine. Vader then somewhat asks Sabé for her advice or her counsel, and she says, do what you always do, just confront it head on. So Vader goes to Palpatine with Sabé at his side, and Palpatine somewhat greets them, and then Vader lifts Sabé into the air with the Force. She's completely taken aback by this and says, Anakin, what are you? And then can't finish anything, and then Palpatine starts laughing. He notes that the name Anakin Skywalker just reminds Vader of pain and weakness and grief, and he doesn't actually like hearing it, so doing that is just a reminder in an unpleasant way. But Palpatine is still intrigued by Sabé, so he signals his royal guards, who both attack Sabé. She then fights them and there's kind of running away from them and evading them. Clearly she can't fight them on a one-to-one basis because they are some of the most elite fighters in the galaxy. You wouldn't know that from the films because they always go up Force sensitives who just destroy them immediately, but they are actually very, very hard to kill. In fact, in the Lando miniseries by Charles Soule, there is like a whole kind of fight scene between them. It's quite interesting, so I'd say yeah, check that out. But yeah, they're attacking and things, and they start firing some sort of blasters at Sabé, and then she dives behind Palpatine's throne. They are just still firing at her, just kind of following her with their shots, and the shots go to hit Palpatine. He puts his hand up and then just absorbs all of the energy, and then shoots lightning back at the guards, and they collapse to the floor. And it looks like they may have actually been killed by that as well. He kind of thinks to himself for a moment, and then asks Sabé, "Why do you want to kill me?" And she says, "It's because of the chaos that you cause." And he says, "No, that's you. You're causing the chaos. But you're doing it in the service of order, so I might be able to use you." Then Palpatine praises Vader and says, "Thank you for bringing her to me. Even though Sabé may somewhat be troubling to you, it seems to bring up some sort of strange feelings and things, you are still moulding her. And so you need to continue to do so to push her to continue to serve the Empire." And then they go on a mission. Palpatine sends the duo to Skako Minor, where there's an uprising. So Skako Minor, you actually first saw it in the Clone Wars Season 7. It was in an episode called The Bad Batch, which introduced those guys. And it's also shown in a 2016 Afrocomic number 15, which I tackled in episode 46 of Comics in Canon. And it's where the Polytech species live. It's a misty service planet that's got fungal forests, mountains, canyons, so quite a wide variety of biomes. And although the Polytech species live there, which you only really get to see in the Clone Wars briefly, they don't really seem to be much else. There are other species and things living there. So the reason they're being sent there is because a person called Jul Tambor is there, who is Wat Tambor's grandson. Now, Wat Tambor was the leader of the Techno Union. You saw him primarily in Attack of the Clones. He's in the Clone Wars as well, but he's the person I remember specifically in the scene on Geonosis when Dooku is talking at that table and Obi-Wan is spying, and you've got the Mun species going, "The banking clan will sign your treaty." And then there's another one who talks, who's like this robot-y looking guy. And he talks like this, and he turns to like a dial, and his voice modulator thing goes all weird. That's Wat Tambor, that guy. So he's in the Clone Wars a fair bit, but yeah, he does get killed by Anakin on Mustafar, and so this is his grandson. It's also worth noting that Wat Tambor and obviously his grandson Jul are both Skakoans, so Skakoan. They can live for quite a long time, but the reason that they look like robots kind of in the Clone Wars and on screen is because they wear specific suits so they can breathe the right air, so the pressure of their bodies can deal with things. You don't really see them unmasked very often, but in that Afra issue I mentioned you do actually get to see them. And their homeworld is Skako, and then Skako Minor is also one of their homeworlds as well. Skako Minor is just a smaller planet than Skako. Or Skako. I don't know how to pronounce it. Skako. It could be either. I imagine it's Skako, but still. So anyway, the reason that Vader and Sabé are going after Jul Tambor is because Jul has organised some pirates to blockade the planet, and also they started to stockpile technology. So they want to investigate. So at planet side, there are poisonous gas like everywhere, so everyone has to wear rebreathers and things, and there's also these gigantic cliff worms that start to attack. When Vader and Sabé enter, there's already 3 people kind of shooting these giant worms. Vader then manages to kill one, and then these people who are nearby are like, "Oh my god, thank you, that's really great." And then Sabé notices a pile of bodies and is like, "These people, did you kill them?" And then the 3 people there are kind of like, well, maybe the air just didn't agree with them. And so Vader responds to that by just going for them and swiping at them and kills 2 of them. One of them does escape, and then Sabé is now kind of unsure of herself, like what she's done. And she's struggling. She doesn't know who deserves what anymore. Everything is all so grey and confusing. And Vader, among other things, he basically says, "Look, Emperor says that you're ruthless, so don't play games with me. You've devoted your life to punishing and judging others. You are no longer the Queen's shadow. You are only shadow. Accept who you are." She then says, "Why don't we keep some of these people alive so that we can actually find Jul Tambor?" And Vader says, "Well, why don't you infiltrate this organisation, this group, and I'll do the rest." While that's all going on, the final panels show that Ochi is tied to a chair in his hut on Naboo, and some people asking him some questions and things about Sabé primarily, and they're confused why she hasn't killed Darth Vader and why she isn't seemingly going to kill Darth Vader, and Ochi is saying certain reasons why, but then he's really confused what's going on. And it shows it is the Handmaidens who vow that they must either save or stop Sabé. And that's where issue 28 ends, so we go on to issue 29, the final issue of this batch. So the Handmaidens themselves, we saw them in The Phantom Menace. They are in quite a lot of the Queen's trilogy by E.K. Johnston. As I said, Queen's Peril, Queen's Shadow and Queen's Hope. They assist the sovereigns with everyday tasks, including like makeup and hair and getting ready and stuff, but also they do help as security. Now it is an old tradition that had kind of been not quite forgotten about, but people didn't really do it very much. But then when Padmé became queen, she then spoke with Quarsh Panaka and then decided that maybe we should bring this back. And he was like, well, why don't we just get one? And then they can be sort of your bodyguard and your assistant and things. But Padmé was like, no, we need to have several of them. And this became more and more important as the assassination attempts got worse. So Padmé chose people, and then all of Padmé's handmaidens then adopt names that are similar to Padmé's, so it confuses people. So they are Irate, Rabe, Sache, Yane, and Sabé. They're all people that she had around her in sort of the Phantom Menace, that sort of time. Then when Padmé became senator, she then got a couple more. So she then had Versailles, Corday, and Dormé. And Sabé then was like unofficially in there as well. Corday then died at the start of Attack of the Clones along with Versailles. That's when that ship explodes and we kind of first find out about the assassination attempts on Padmé herself. And then we get LA and Mote are then hired. Now obviously it's a lot of names throwing at you. I don't know exactly which ones are in this next issue I'm going to be tackling. They do speak about things with names, so I think Dormé is quite a central one, and Dormé was actually played by Rose Byrne in the Star Wars prequel trilogy. You saw her specifically speak to Padmé before Anakin and her go off to Naboo when they're being like protected and they run around in the fields and that sort of stuff. Rose Byrne's character kind of cries a tear for Padmé when she's on that transport and things and says that she worries about her. That's who Dormé is. So with that all in mind, let's move on to the final issue of this batch, issue 29. So it starts off with Vader thinking about himself and Obi-Wan, their kind of final confrontation on Mustafar before Anakin got the suit. And there's a line that Obi-Wan says, which is only a Sith deals in absolutes, and that kind of sticks with Vader. And he thinks to himself, yes, I am a Sith. Meanwhile, Ochi of Bestoon lands on a Star Destroyer with Dormé and manages to fool some stormtroopers by pretending that Dormé is actually Sabé. But they do try and avoid droids because they think that droids would be able to notice the difference between the two individuals. They manage to get to a certain room, and Dormé puts on the armour of Sabé's that Vader gifted to her. So she now looks even more like Sabé than before. And then she makes a comment saying that she can't believe that Sabé is basically Vader's pet. Two of Sabé's personal stormtroopers then show up, can't tell the difference between Sabé and Dormé, and just start speaking to her as they normally would, and Dormé says to them, I've received intelligence that my recent excursion may have been compromised, so you need to tell me exactly who you've told about this and how much information you've given out. They mention they spoke about it a little bit in the armory because it happened like a few days ago, and she says, tell me everything, I need to know who knows what. So they give her information on what Sabé's mission was, and they note that by Lord Vader's command, Sabé is in disguise and is alone and needs to assassinate Jul Tambor. This is on Brental 4, where Jul Tambor is giving supplies to some people, and he says that he is going to fight for them, for these people who are being seemingly oppressed by the Empire. A citizen then blames Jul for the bombings that's going on, and then a bombing goes off. It shows that it seems to have been caused by two droids who claim they're from the Droid Crush. The Droid Crush I mentioned, I think, I've mentioned it quite a few times. They seem to be popping up quite a lot. They're somewhat associated with Ochi of Bestoon, and they were in the second volume of Vader comics when Vader returns to Mustafar and things, so go and check that out if you want more information on the Droid Crush. And as these droids attack, Jul Tambor shoots one and Sabé shoots the other one. He greets her and thanks her for assisting, and then he goes back to Ochi, who tells Dormé about Sabé's involvement in the deaths of several Imperial officers, the Crimson Dawn and Imperial battle that ended up in hundreds of people being killed, the recent stuff that happened, and Dormé is kind of taken aback by this, but she's also quite suspicious of Ochi. She seems to think he's not telling her everything. Dormé then gets a comm from Admiral Piet, and he tells her that Darth Vader wants to see her, still thinking that she's Sabé. So back to Sabé on her mission. She's told about the Skakoan's breather needs and things, which obviously I mentioned a little bit earlier, and then G90 shows up. So G90, he is the sort of assassin droid who is like a big orb, like a giant BB-8, that Vader sliced in half in Darth Vader number 21, who is seemingly repaired. He's got sort of the scarring around his middle area. And just after G90 shows up, Jul Tambor is then talking to Sabé and says that he needs to kill Darth Vader. Darth Vader killed his grandfather, and then his father died as well, so he needs to kill Darth Vader. And Sabé is begging him not to. She's saying, you can't do this, like, it won't actually work. Even if you succeeded, the retaliation would wipe out all of your people. Please believe me. And then it cuts back to the Star Destroyer, where Darth Vader has Sabé's guards on their knees, and he says that they have failed. there is a blaster nearby, and then he says to Sabé, look, you need to kill them. You need to show them that you've done this. They are then like begging Sabé, just obviously this is Dormé, but they think it's Sabé. They are begging her to not kill them and things. And Vader's like, well, what, you're begging her not to kill you? On your last moment, you want to be begging. So they then realise what he's hinting at and dive for the blaster as well. Dormé manages to grab the blaster, there's like a struggle and things, but she does shoot both of these stormtroopers. However, the shots were non-lethal. Vader then brings her up on this and says, see, I knew you weren't Sabé, because Sabé would have killed those people. And Dormé says, nope, Sabé would not have killed them. And Vader says, then you don't know her anymore, or what she's capable of. And the last panel of this comic shows that Sabé is standing over Jewel Tambor's corpse with a smoking hole in its chest while she is holding the gun. And that, my friends, is where this ends. So, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate that. Please tell me what you thought of these Vader comics and stuff. And basically, I'm just interested because I think the 2017 Vader run is definitely the best, the Charles Soule run. But I am really liking this. It's not what I expected from a run of Darth Vader comics, but lots of twists and turns, lots of espionage and stuff. So, I think it works really well, especially with the Bounty Hunters comics. So, I am enjoying. But what have we got coming up? Well, I'm either going to do the Hidden Empire batch of comics. I don't know if I'm just going to do Hidden Empire 1 just by itself, or if I'm going to try and do Hidden Empire 1 and then like Darth Vader 30, Star Wars 30, and the other two, the Aphra and the Bounty Hunters issues. I need to really look at exactly where they each kind of fall, because I don't want to do all these episodes and then when I do Hidden Empire 5, it's all out of line. I've kind of done the wrong issues. I don't think it's that important, but I'm going to kind of try and figure it out. I may end up doing Revelations first, which is another one-shot, and it's kind of, the way it's described is like an insight into the future of these ongoing comics, and it's got Aphra, Bounty Hunters, Vader, and Star Wars there. I don't really know its point. I read it once and I was like, okay, that was alright. It kind of feels like an epilogue, but the runs are still going, so I don't really understand, and it doesn't seem like essential reading. It's quite weird. Maybe upon the reread it will make a little bit more sense to me, but I'm probably going to do Hidden Empire or Revelations next week. But I am nearing the end of the Quest for the Hidden City book, so I may end up doing the book review for that, which is in the High Republic Phase 2, Wave 1. It's the junior novel, so it's either going to be one of those three things, Hidden Empire, Revelations, or the book review, and then whichever one it isn't next week, one of the other ones will probably be the following week. And then we'll kind of go from there. So that's a small insight going forward. Obviously, we've got Rebels reviewed, which is going to be coming out in the next month or so. I think I'm recording that in about a week and a half. So that's going to be quite fun. That's going to be myself, Math, and Dave Horrocks talking about the first season of Star Wars Rebels, the animated show that can currently be found on Disney+. We're going to go through the whole of Star Wars Rebels this year. It's a rewatch for me. I think I'm on my third or fourth watch. Dave is on his second watch, and Math has never seen it before. So it's a really good opportunity for yourselves to watch some of the best Star Wars content that exists, which is Star Wars Rebels. In addition to that, I'm part of the Pop Culture Collective. It is an initiative fronted by Super Dummy Paul of Era of Geek and the Dummy's Guide to Geekdom, where in essence a group of us are contributing to a newsletter every week. So sometimes there'll be information on new stuff that I'm up to, but also there's like brief summaries of episodes. So if you want a good idea of what I'm up to with Star Wars comics in canon and also with genuine chit-chat, I put information in there. Plus new shows get started. There's some stuff from the Femon Collective. Tony Farina writes in there. Spider-Dan the Secret Boars writes in there, and other members of the Comics in Motion family and the people related to the Comics in Motion family who've appeared in various shows and those sorts of things. So if you want to be kept up to date without having to follow all of us on social media and all that sort of stuff, please click on the link in the description for the Pop Culture Collective so you can sign up to the newsletter and get updated every week with stuff that I'm up to and various other individuals too. In addition to that, I'm currently in talks to speak with another Star Wars author. I won't say anything further about that individual, but I'm very excited about that. So keep your eyes peeled on that. Make sure you subscribe on the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/genuinechitchat. Every single episode of Star Wars Comics and Canon is on there in playlists and things. And in addition to that, you get video versions of a lot of my conversations with people, including with Kevin Scott, with Alex and Molly Damon of Star Wars Explained, with loads of people involved with Star Wars and loads of people not involved with Star Wars. So it's a great place to expand your knowledge about a wide variety of things. Please consider going over there and subscribing to the YouTube channel. Also follow me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook, where there are snippets of Genuine Chit-Chat episodes. There's photos of the comics I tackle on Star Wars Comics in Canon. There's loads of things over there and a few bits and pieces of what I'm up to, movies I watch, photos of Willow occasionally, and places I go with Megan. So lots of cool things there. In addition to that, you can support the show by sharing on social media, telling your friends all about it, reviewing and rating on Spotify, Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, and all those wonderful things. And also you can support the show by going to patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat. For as little as £1 a month, you get access to an audio feed over there that you can't get anywhere else. It's accessible by the Patreon app or website, or you can just copy the RSS link and put it in the podcast player of your choice. And then you get access to the exclusive feed, which has got 140 odd episodes of Afterthoughts in there. Some of them are Star Wars book reviews that aren't available anywhere else, like my A New Dawn book review and like my Star Wars Legends book reviews. I put quite a lot of them up there. There's the Darth Plagueis book, the Darth Bane trilogy, there's Shatterpoint. I've recorded Rogue Squadron, which is the first of the X-Wing series. I've just recorded Revan as well, which is of the old Republic times. I'm also going to be listening to more. I've almost finished the Darth Maul Shadowhunter book as well, which is narrated by Sam Witwer, who obviously voices Darth Maul in Rebels and in Clone Wars. So very, very exciting stuff over on Patreon, as well as my normal things with Megan, where I review TV shows and movies and live performances and all that sort of stuff. You get an episode of Afterthoughts basically every week, so please consider going over there and checking that out. There's not really much else to add, my friends. There's something I feel like I'm forgetting, but I can't remember what it is, unironically. So that's going to be enough from me, friends. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'll talk to you next week with either Revelations Hidden Empire or the Quest for the Hidden City book review. I appreciate you all a huge amount. I will speak to you next week, and as always, may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics and Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics and Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.